Hello, and welcome back to the Bite Pod, the show where we explore the people, strategies, and systems shaping global trade and trade compliance. I'm your host, Ann Riitho. On this show, we talk to experts from across the trade ecosystem to make complex topics more practical, more accessible, and more useful for the people doing this work every day. Joining me today is Simran Dalvi from CITTA Brokerage. CITTA Brokerage is a firm focused on duty drawback and helping companies identify opportunities to recover duties, tariffs, and taxes where they may be eligible. Simran brings a strong legal and compliance perspective to this work with experience at the intersection of customs regulation and international trade. Throughout this conversation, we'll be talking about what duty drawback is in simple terms, how it compares to other duty-saving strategies, where companies often miss opportunities, common mistakes, and how teams can build better processes. So whether you're new to drawback or you're thinking about how to make your existing program more effective, this will be a great conversation for you. Simran, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Anne. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so usually we like to get started with just a little bit of your background and your path into this space, especially in this space because drawback is such a specialized area of compliance. Can you just walk through how you got into this and kind of what led you into this area of focus?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I came into this space through international trade law and cross-regulatory work. So just as a background, I'm a lawyer. I've done my undergrad in law, my master's in law, and I specialize in international law. But what really, so I already have that international trade law background, but what really led me to trade compliance was the fact that it's not just regulation. It's essentially, it's kind of at a point where the law, business, and the whole reality actually collides. It's not just the regulation you're looking at, it's the business point of view that you're looking at as well. So it's knowing about the regulation in theory, but it's also about understanding how the goods move, how records are maintained, how inventory is kept. So the legit business side of it. And that's kind of how I was drawn to it. When it comes to duty drawback, what actually, piqued my interest in duty drawback is essentially the fact that it's built on processes. I really love that kind of work where the statute is built into workflow and it's built into processes. So I always say this to people: duty drawback stands out just because it's one of the most technically demanding spaces of trade compliance, but it's also one of the most commercially meaningful spaces if you get it right. So, if you get the technicality and the complexity of it right, it can be absolutely meaningful and it can be very, very profitable in a very financial sense of, the point of it. My work at CITTA essentially, just why and what led me to CITTA. I like saying that, CITTA is a company that kind of works and does drawback in a very practical nature. So at CITTA, it's not just about, this is a regulation, this is how you apply, this is how you train people. I think it's a more holistic point of view, seeing it in a way that customs would see it. Building a claim, making sure it's defensible, making sure that, you're operationalizing it correctly. All those things kind of come together in CITTA. And I think the mentality of, if customs had to review this, say, 5 years down the line, would they be okay with that? And building that work from a futuristic perspective, I think that's what is very compelling at CITTA, especially, and what drawback requires. So on a very long story short, I guess, it was just international trade law that collided with the business reality of it, which made me so interested in trade compliance as a whole.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. And it sounds like both your own personal journey and CITTA is like this amazing intersection of the regulation and then the actual implementation or process that then gets you to the outcome. So that sounds like a great fit between the two of you as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is what trade compliance is, to find that fit between somebody who understands the regulation piece of it, and then, the other piece of it is someone who uses and basically bridges that knowledge from a regulation piece or a statute piece to actually workflow knowledge. And I guess that sync really needs to happen for everybody in the trade compliance world, because that's just how, your knowledge kind of would be utilized perfectly. So I guess we both utilize each other correctly, I guess, in a certain way.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this is a really great place to start because a lot of our listeners, Drawback may be something that like they've heard of or they know about it, but it's not something that they necessarily work with regularly. So kind of getting down into the basics, like laying the groundwork for everyone who's listening. For someone who's new to Drawback, how would you explain it in simple terms, and where does it fit in compared to other duty saving strategies, like a bonded warehouse, for example?
Sure, and that's a great question. In the simplest terms, and it's a refund program. So say, for example, a company imports goods that, they bring into the United States, and they pay duties on these goods, on these imports. And eventually they export the good, whether it's in the same condition, whether they manufacture it into a new product, as long as they export it and they destroy it, and, it's done in a way that is legit and is accurate, you can get the money back on what you've paid for your imports. For what you've paid initially in duties. So essentially, it's something that comes in, goes out, and if it's done correctly, you can get a refund on the duties you paid when you imported the goods. And I think at its core, Drawback is just it's about recovering money that would otherwise remain embedded in the cost of doing business. So you want to make sure that, what is coming in, what is going out, if you're entitled to that money is legally yours. CBP usually says this, that Drawback is a privilege, not a right. It's a very famous thing in Drawback, but I guess for me, there's this other piece of it that is also that this is money that is legally owed to you. And it's essentially a refund program. So in the simplest terms, that is what Drawback is. A very good question as to how it fits with all these other trade compliance strategies, whether it's an FTZ, whether it's a bonded warehouse. I think there are many distinctions, but to me, from a very strategic point of view, FTZs and bonded warehouses are mostly about taking care of the duty exposure before the duty actually falls in the goods. So you've not paid duty at that point when it's in an FTZ or something like that. It's more about managing duty exposure before it actually falls into the good that comes into US commerce. Whereas Drawback is more retro. It's more retro. So it's something where it's come into the country, you've paid the duty, it's going out, and you're going to get a refund program on it. You're going to get a refund on it, and there's a refund program that you can make out of it. So in the simplest terms, one is more prospective, where you're thinking about what next and how, you can manage your duty timing. And the other, which is Drawback, is more about going behind and seeing, what is now owed to you from CBP because of what you paid initially. So that's a very simplified version of saying that, but I think that's the simplest way to say that too.
Yeah, no, that comparison is really helpful. And I think, one kind of follow-up question I have there is, when would a company know when Drawback is the right fit, or what should companies be looking for when approaching a Drawback situation? How can they kind of quickly determine like Drawback is the right for this specific situation that they have?
That's a really good question, and I do feel like there are some companies, for them it could be a little bit of a more of a digging work, just because it may not be as black and white. But one of the clearest signs that you're probably leaving money on the table is the fact that you import regularly, and at least you have some form of export activity going on. So when you're importing and then there is at least some export, that this is a duty you've paid, and at least you can at least consider that, am I eligible for it? That's when your brain should probably start clicking in the sense that there is an import and export that's going on here. And so it might be worth looking at it. Another thing, another sign is when a business does these reverse logistics, when they're involved in warranty programs, when they're involved in exports, when they're involved in manufacturing processes, and those manufacturing operations actually lead to exports. That's also another sign where, you can kind of think about, drawback may exist here. And so these, I think, are very two obvious, clear signs when a company can think about drawback. And there is, the best part is that the first, I guess the good news is that the first initial assessment that you do, it can be relatively straightforward because you don't need it to be claim and customs ready on that first go. And I mean, companies like ours, like CITTA, and can actually do that first assessment really relatively quickly to at least tell you if you're eligible or not. So, it can be as simple as you don't need to build the entire claim. It can be a company can begin by reviewing a sample period, usually the last 12 to 24 months, pulling a few core data points, seeing what the import is, how much was imported, what percentage of that import was exported, what their infrastructure in terms of inventory looks like. Those are some really good points. And, just even if, we get that knowledge, if I'm going to use my company as an example, it's very easy for us to say that, hey, this company is eligible for, drawback. This company has a potential, revenue of, this is what is owed to them. In many cases, if, we kind of go into a little bit of more detail about understanding what their process is, we can say what kind of drawback is it? Is it unused? Is it manufacturing? Is it rejected? So that first pass alone can reveal whether you have a drawback program or whether you have substantial revenue that is waiting for you. So, and that initial assessment doesn't have to be CBP ready. It can just be a very superficial overview of what's going on there.
Yeah. So I guess just because you're exploring what it could do for you doesn't mean you need to have like everything all set up, all your ducks in a row. Like you can start to explore if it's a right fit for you as an initial first step.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, yes, drawback is very documentation heavy, and like there's a lot of companies think about it as an afterthought. And I mean, hopefully we get, we speak about a little bit about IPA, I hope. Now I think the mentality has shifted a little bit. And they've kind of realized that this is not something that is an afterthought. It has to be embedded in our system way before. But even having said that, like, it doesn't have to be that you're completely ready and you're battle ready on day one. It can be something you work with your drawback brokers on of what is required, what is not. But the first step is to even see if drawback is something that is an option to you. And that can be a very initial assessment that, drawback brokers like us could probably provide relatively easily.
Yeah. And then once you get past that step and you realize that there is, in fact, an opportunity here. Obviously, the next challenge is then executing on that, right? And you've said it's very technical, it's very paperwork heavy. So when you've worked with companies and they've actually started filing their claims, where do you see like things go wrong most often, or kind of when you say embedding things from the beginning, like what processes can people start building in from the beginning that help reduce whether it be a delay or a denial or any other risk associated?
Sure. I think the most common mistake that I feel like companies usually make is that companies treat drawback, like I already mentioned, as an afterthought. They feel like they can assemble everything at the very end, like as if it's a reimbursement packet that you submit an application and get done with it. Unfortunately, fortunately, it's not as simple as that. I wish it were, but it's truly not. It actually depends on having all these processes in place, coherent record keeping, and a proper structure right from the beginning. So the claim, honestly, is only as strong as as the process behind it is. So if your import records, if your inventory movement, if your export production and, your export plan, your manufacturing plan, if these are things that do not connect clearly, that can be a huge issue. So I think a few specific issues in my experience come up again and again. Like, for example, one major example would be poor traceability. It has to link from import to export. You're trying to show CBP you're trying to kind of narrate a story through documentation. You're trying to tell them that this product came in at this time, at this date, it went into the warehouse, it was made into a new product, it was taken out, it was exported, it went to XYZ country. It's a whole story. It's whole. You're not narrating it, but you have to show it through your documentation. And I guess that one thing that usually comes up is that link, seeing that link right from import to export. So the traceability is one of the things that usually comes across very often in some kinds of drawback. I think the other thing would be inventory. A lot of companies, every company needs to have good inventory. You need to show customs your internal documents. You need to show them that what I said is going to come to me has actually come to me. So, and it needs to link that import, the warehouse. Say, for example, we've taken a warehouse receipt and withdrawal. It has to link to that import that came in on this date and time and at this quantity, at this part number. So I feel like inventory has been a huge issue that I feel like, most companies struggle with. And then finally, also export documentation. You have to show that it's leaving the country, because usually CBP comes back and they would say, you told me that these 12 boxes are leaving on this date, but I'm seeing that something left on this date. I probably don't know that it's the 12 boxes you told me it is. And so to be able to, give all of that and show that link start to finish is, I think it's storytelling. I call it that way. And so I think most companies, have that problem. And these are the things that we usually, see. But obviously, when you have a good drawback broker working with you, they kind of preemptively will tell you what is required, and that should help in some ways. But these are the issues that I feel like I see really often. And the best way to streamline and the process is making sure that drawback is not just a filing function. You're kind of looking at it as, a cost that can add to your financials at the end of the year. A lot of these small companies, I remember this is a story from our company itself. We COVID was such a tough time, right? Companies, and at least small companies, let's not even talk about the big companies who could sustain themselves. Small companies had to shut down. We actually worked with a small company during COVID who, one day I think gave us a call or something. And they were like, our accountants were just looking at the books and they were like, this is one stream of revenue we're getting. What is this about? And it was just us filing drawback claims for them. And that's how they could actually make payroll month after month during COVID. When I kind of say that, it's not something you can treat as an afterthought, this is what I say. It can actually help you actually keep your company afloat, help you make payroll, help you. For small companies, absolutely. Can you imagine what, 100K or 200K can do for a small company? That's significant.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I just think, making sure that these documentation and all of these things are something you think about much in advance and don't just create or treat it as this reimbursement packet, like I call it, is really something that a company can do and should do, I think.
Yeah. So two things that you've just said that, bring me to my next question, which is about tariffs. But one, as in the current tariff environment, we've talked to so many people, and the advice is like, so much of trade compliance now is depending on your data, your documentation, how your systems are talking together or to each other, say. So obviously that plays a huge role. So, if people have their duty drawback program in place, are they more prepared for tariff changes? Do they have more in place? But also, again, what you just said, we heard about companies at the beginning of the tariff passages where people were going out of business because they got hit with a tariff bill of, say, $70,000. And what can they do with that? So in the current tariff environment, and all iterations of the past year we're at now, what have you seen in terms of the interest in duty drawback, either increasing or decreasing, or how are those two kind of mechanisms interacting at this point?
And I'm not going to lie to you, it's been significant. And I can't even downplay this. I'll be honest with you. I remember, a couple of years ago when I used to go to these conferences, whether it's ICPA, NCBFA, usually when I used to sit at a table with other people, starting a conversation about drawback used to be okay because everyone's in the same um, industry, but people like you kind of started the podcast with that. Like most people have heard about it, and back
Mhm.
then it was just that, yeah, duty drawback, we've heard but we don't know. Versus today, a couple of months ago when I was at a conference, people want to actively talk about duty drawback. It's no longer a place where we need to introduce how duty drawback works. Most people kind of have generated interest because, I mean, it rightly so. There are companies that have paid millions in IPA tariffs, and just making sure that you can get that back. Duty drawback is a legit way. I mean, today when we talk about these refunds, I mean, we're all hearing about CAPE and CBP and what they're doing, and where we are at that stage and what CIT is doing, etc. Duty drawback is one of those things that comes in that list. That this is also a way that you can probably get your money back. Obviously, you don't want to double dip, and you don't want to
Yeah.
like claim drawback and you want to claim refunds. You can't do that. But the point is that today it's a legit way of getting that money back, and it's money that is it's no small feat. We're talking about millions of dollars in revenue, or sorry, in money that was spent. So
Mhm.
the interest to your question has been significant. People want to learn more about it. People want to understand how they can apply for it. But again, I just feel like a lot of companies, even though their interest has been piqued, it's some of them are prepared, but many of them may not even be prepared, because now it's a little bit of this struggle situation of what can I do now? But a lot of these situations can be avoided if you kind of preemptively do some of those things. And honestly, it's not hard. Just make sure your documentation is right, because I usually say this to everyone at my company is that, documentation is something that can make or break you. There is no drawback without documentation. I mean, you could be a Fortune 500 client with millions in revenue for the company, and if you don't have documentation, there's no way I can make a case for you. And I'm saying that even as a lawyer, um, there's just no way. So we can't generate documentation, we can't doctor anything, and we won't. It
Right.
has to be something that you do in a legit manner right from the beginning. And so I guess to succinctly, I guess at the end of all of this, kind of answer your question, the interest has been a lot, and I think as the situation is getting better or hopefully not worse, it's going to stay. It's there to stay. So I guess drawback is there to stay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because as you said, we're hearing so much about the IEPA refunds, which obviously, for people who don't have, who aren't exporting, or who don't fit into a drawback situation, then the IEPA refunds are the best way to go. But for anyone who could potentially fit into a drawback situation, this you know perhaps like looking at drawback and getting that in place, and then you're not reliant on the next Supreme Court ruling or the next
Exactly.
this, that you can work in your system, and you can perhaps have a little bit more ability to plan and stability, almost knowing what you'll be able to do.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's always going to, help you pay payrolls or make payrolls, or it's not always going to be that. But I mean, I know that some of these, even big companies, usually, at the end of the fiscal year, you're probably a few, a little behind your goal, maybe, for example. And, one claim that is liquidated or paid out can help you bridge that gap. So all I'm saying is it's not something that is just, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not pocket change. It's something that, is deliberate. You need to deliberately think about it as something that can, make or break some of your financials, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And um it's a lot of what you're saying, like we touched on previously. It's about the documentation, it's about the process. You mentioned, if you have a good broker like CITTA, they can help you do that. Have you seen any tools or technologies? I have to say I've seen a lot of technology saying it with
Yeah.
duty drawback. Bite does not help with duty drawback right now. I'll just throw that out there. But I've seen a lot of people who say that they do.
Yeah.
So what, are there tools or technologies, I'm thinking even like inventory tools, what have you seen that helps people set up their duty drawback, and how does that work into like a trade compliance workflow versus just like a business workflow?
Right. And honestly, and I feel like AI and technology is the new buzzword, right? Like technology, the technology side of duty drawback is becoming more interesting by the day, because people are finally using people are actually understanding that drawback is no longer just a paperwork issue. It's something
Mhm.
that you can actually operationalize in a different way. So to me, I see it fundamentally as three issues, a data issue, a logic issue, and a workflow challenge. So most companies that I'm hearing who are working with the technology side of drawback are actually just trying to solve the combination of these three issues, making sure that they can gather data from multiple sources, making sure that they're matching the import and the export documentation and activity according to what's required, and then finally creating a defensible audit trail. So every form of technology that exists out there is usually, tackling these three issues in just different ways, which is great. No complaints out there. I feel like, some of it has been manual over the last couple of years, and it was time to get rid of that. And I love that. I love the tools, we can provide to our customers, to our clients, making sure that, it makes it easier, it makes it efficient, it makes it faster. It is a great, side and a place to be in today where technology plays a huge role. But having said that, I also feel like I think good technology can really help drawback, but unfortunately, I don't think it can completely replace professionals. And when I say that, what I'm trying to say is that it makes work more scalable, it makes our work more consistent. But what it probably can't do is make those judgment calls. So, a lot of these trade compliance teams still have to make those judgment calls. They still have to understand the statute, the regulation, the interpretation of things, and the client's business model, even like what applies, what fits, what might be the best way possible. So what I do think is that the right tool, and one must use, today, if you're not using technology, you're behind, a little behind in the race. I will say that the right technology can make your life easier. It can make the manual, work go away. It can make it a lot more efficient. It can make sure that, these mismatches that usually happen don't happen. But I also think that human judgment is required. So I feel like it's in tandem. It needs to have its own game. It needs to just be in sync. I feel like right now the space we're in, one can't exist without the other, and I think that's a good place to be in. I'll tell you that, because heavy reliance on either one, to me, I see that as a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, and that's the approach we take at Byte as well. It's not duty drawback, like I said, but in other aspects of trade compliance, yeah, you always, we believe you still need that human in a loop. So in the loop.
Right.
So if looking at an HTS classification, you need someone
Exactly.
who understands the product and understands how classification works, and work, maybe those two people working together even to get to that right classification.
Right.
And even with the tariffs, like you only know if your good is less than 15% metal content if you have someone asking the right questions. Even if your documentation is great, you need someone to know what applies and what doesn't, and
Exactly.
so yeah, definitely that kind of, I love that how you said the like reliance on each other, and like no over reliance on one. I think that's a great takeaway there.
For sure.
Yeah, and then just a last question, I love to end on like a practical takeaway. So for our listeners who are thinking like maybe we should be looking at this more closely, but we don't know where to start, or I did this once and it didn't work and I'm never going to do it again. Like what do you recommend to our listeners, and what do you want people to keep in mind as they either think about drawback or think about getting into drawback, or any of the above?
I feel like if I had to reduce, and there's so much advice I can give, but if I had to reduce for the sake of time, if I had to reduce it to one or two practical, advices or recommendations, I would say that, do a retro review. Just see, what the past 5 years has looked at, what your story tells in terms of import, export. Is there a story to be told there? To be told there? Bring together all these different teams, whether it's trade compliance, whether it's operations, whether it's finance, whether it's logistics, and see what data you have. I think because drawback is often missed because not because of the fact that something is missing, but because of the fact that different teams don't put the story together. Sometimes one team will just treat it as we did the import part of it, and the other team will think about it as the export part of it, but together it makes a story. So when you get all these teams together, you probably feel like, oh, there's a story to be told. So involve all of these teams much sooner. That would be my first advice of, kind of looking at seeing if you're drawback eligible. And I think the second piece of it would be second, third, fourth, fifth piece of it would be documentation. It's so important. It's so important to keep, you have your ducks in a row. Make sure that, your import documentation is in place. Your export documentation is in place. Your inventory is good. You're investing in good inventory softwares that can keep records for longer than required. You want to make sure that if CBP comes back ever, God forbid, 5 years later, 10 years later, you can go back and prove to them the logic behind what you did and why you did. I think that's so important. And also make sure that your vendors, the people you're working with, a lot of the times when there's a manufacturing drawback, for example, you're working with all of these contract manufacturers who are helping you with your product. Making sure that the vendors you work with also have good documentation, because at the end of it, you're going to need their support to claim drawback. And so I feel like if I had to reduce it down, it would be these two. Bring teams together, kind of see what your data speaks to you about. And the second is documentation. Just make sure that you're investing in good, inventory softwares. Make sure, your import-export documentations are in place. And I feel like with these two things together, you're already ahead of the curve. Like you're ahead of a lot of people in the race. And that's a good start, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel, so much of trade compliance as we've gone through the Bite Pod and everyone we've talked to, I feel like so much of it does come down to teamwork and, whether bringing in your finance team, your operations team, the trade compliance team ends up being so much larger than just the team who's called trade compliance in a business.
Right.
And
absolutely.
That's one thing that I've just really loved to kind of see over the past year, just like how trade compliance is being recognized as such an important part of the business, not just the compliance of the business.
Right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I support that completely.
Yeah. All right. So if you could give one more piece of advice that if someone wanted to start tomorrow, where should they go in their data? What should they look at when you say do that retrospective?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the last 5 years, and again, I think I mentioned this somewhere in our conversation, that it doesn't even have to be 5 years. Maybe it can be the last 12 or 24 months. See how much you've imported. See what happens when it comes into the United States. See how much of that import is exported. Because you could have 100% import and millions of dollars, but if you're selling it domestically and it's not going out of the country, it's not drawback eligible. So you kind of want to start there. Just see if you have import and export. See that it's worth, your money, and, because at the end of the day, you want to pursue and go behind such a complex program, or even pay someone to go behind a complex program if it's a significant amount, versus if it's a little bit on the lower end, it probably would not be worth it for you or anybody. And I guess your drawback broker can help you with that. But kind of looking at the import and the export side and seeing if there is, value there is a good starting point. Like just see it for the last 12 or 24 months, and that should be enough. And then I think get in touch with a good drawback broker who can do that initial analysis for you, who can look at that data that you have looked at and then be able to tell you that, yeah, you're probably right. We can claim this drawback under this section, under, this is the kind of drawback it is, and this is what it looks like. So I guess looking at your imports and exports first of a sample period, and then getting in touch with the drawback broker who can kind of help you with that initial assessment is a good starting point.
That's great. And if anyone wanted to get in touch with you or anyone at CITTA, how would you recommend that they do that?
Oh, so you can just hop on our website and you can fill out contact us form. Even as, and again, and help me, but even as we're releasing this, maybe we send out my email, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions possible. Even if you reach anyone at CITTA, I think they've been in business for way too long. We're drawback experts. So anyone can probably help you. But our website is a good starting point. And even as we're talking on this website, and when it releases on this podcast, and when it releases, I'll probably just give my email information, and you can reach out to me for any questions, or even if you just want to talk drawback, like it's fun.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Simran. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so glad you were able to join me today. Drawback is definitely one of those areas that can sound super technical at first. And throughout the process, I'm sure it is, but you were really able to operationalize it for us and talk through financial implications. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Bite Pod. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and share this conversation with anyone in your network who wants to talk duty drawback or has an interest in trade compliance. Until next time, thanks for being here.